Hello guys and welcome back to another video. So today we're going to be looking at the choosing your tank Sorc this time. And I know this has been long awaited. A lot of people have been asking when are you releasing the Sorc tank video for this series, and I've always told them in a week or so, and I have failed to deliver. Now that is because unfortunately I've been very busy, and I said it's in my last video with university work. But as of a couple of days ago I'm finally finished my last paper and I can get back to playing the game and producing content. That does also mean that I haven't had too much time to play Morrowind, but I am reasonably familiar with the changes, so don't worry too much about it. I'm pretty confident in what we have to say today about the Sorcerer tank in Morrowind. So, as with all these videos in the series, and please do check out the others if you have not, we're going to be considering the benefits and cons of what makes a Sorcerer a good choice for a tank. So let's get into it. The first ability line we're going to be looking at is Dark Magic. And there's a few options here which are relatively interesting. Now the first is the ultimate ability Absorption Field. This is a nice way of CCing enemies for up to 12 seconds and can be a decent way of ad controlling. Now it also heals your allies within its side. The Absorption Field, often in my experience, people are scared of this almost, at least among newer groups who are not sure about it. It is useful though if you have a weaker healer and there's lots of ads hitting your allies. However, as with most tank builds, you're not going to really be using this too much, as just going down, Aggressive Warhorn is just way better in terms of providing max stats and more damage for your group, so keep that in mind. Moving now on to Restraining Prison. This is effectively the Sorcerer's version of choking talons that DKs have. Now the downside is that this ability does not apply Minor Maim, meaning that enemies are still going to be doing full damage. There's also a little bit of finesse required with this, because it's not an AoE, instead it's a rectangular frontal ability, meaning that it goes quite a long distance. This means that if there's two packs of enemies split up, if you cast this you might hit both of them, immobilizing them in two separate groups, meaning you're not stacking them, and that can be an issue for a tank. However, there is a way around this, and it is, at least with ranged adds, is that if you have immobilized them away from the group, if they can still ranged attack you, if you're running Swarm Mothers, you can drag them into the group and they'll still be CC'd. So keep that in mind, and I should have moused over that a bit longer. So yeah, just Swarm Mothers, it pulls an enemy to you when you block an attack. Returning now to the skills, another thing to keep in mind with Restraining Prison is that you want to be applying this before the 5.4 seconds expires on the initial immobilization, because otherwise, if they're slowed for example, after the effect ends, you'll find it very difficult, and I don't even think you can reapply the immobilization component until they're no longer slowed. So keep that in mind if the DPS is a bit low or you want to maintain immobilization on a group for a long time. Moving now on to Dark Deal. So Dark Deal is the primary way that sorcerers are going to be restoring resources, but there's a few things to keep in mind. Now with Morrowind there's a lot of nerfs to sustain. Pretty much nothing that now restores resources scales off of max stats, and it's instead a flat value. Now Dark Deal is a flat value as well, though it is quite a nice ratio, as 3k Magicka for a 10k plus heal plus 5k stamina is a really good deal. Now obviously there's a downside to this, it's 1.2 second cast time, and especially if you have internet like me, so Australian lag, this 1.2 seconds can actually last for up to 2 seconds, especially if you get stuck in that animation a little bit, which can happen. So the better your internet, the better Sorc tanking is. Now, one way you can get around this, at least in my experience, is, well, first off, you want to be casting this after a heavy attack so you don't get caught out and get smacked in the face and die. Always important to time it around safe windows, or in safe windows, sorry. You want to time it in safe windows. Timing around would mean you'd get killed. But another factor you can do is if you see a synergy on the floor, for example, that you can activate Dark Deal first, it'll do the cast time, and then if you just spam your X button, if that's your synergy key, it'll pretty much cancel out any lag or delay you'll have with this ability, meaning that it's much more smooth. So keep that tip in mind, that it certainly has helped me enjoy Sorc tanking a lot more, and has prevented any unfortunate deaths on my end. Moving now on to the passives, and one thing you'll notice with all the passives for Sorcerers is that honestly, the passive lines are more orientated towards DPS or pets, which isn't so great for tanking. However, there are a couple here in Dark Magic. So Unholy Knowledge is the first one, reducing the cost of our Magicka and Stamina abilities. Since as tanks we're going to be using both Stamina and Magicka, this means that 5% is quite a nice reduction, especially with the nerfs to sustain and increased ability cost with Morrowind. Now Blood Magic is not applicable because we're not doing damage with our Dark Magic abilities, Now, persistence here, 20% increase in our dark magic duration. It just means that things like Restraining Prison and Absorption Field go a little bit longer in terms of the bang for your buck, so always nice. Now, finally here, Exploitation. Casting a dark magic ability such as Restraining Prison or even Dark Deal is going to be, granting Minor Prophecy to you and your group. Now, this is a decent way of providing a little bit extra crit to your allies, though there's other ways and other classes that can provide this as well, so it's not unique to your Sorc tank. But, keep it in mind, it is a little added benefit. Moving on to Daedric Summoning. So with Daedric Summoning, to be honest, there's a few things you can say about this, but for the most part it's a pet-orientated line, and because pets require you to slot the ability on both your front bar and your back bar, such as Unstable Familiar for example, it really limits the usefulness for your tank because you want to have as many options on your bar open to support your group. So I can't really recommend it. However, I will very briefly say is if you're looking for a bit of fun, you can morph Unstable Familiar to your Clan Fear for a 35% maximum heal when you cast, recast it in terms of just, it's kind of like an ability, right? You cast the pet and then you activate the ability while the pet's still up and it'll heal you. So, because a lot of tank builds now are stacking max HP, this means that this 35% max HP heal can be quite nice for keeping yourself alive, and maybe if you have a relatively weak healer, you might want to just play around with this in some 4-man content for a bit of fun. However, because as I said, you need to slot it on both bars, it really limits the utility you can provide as a tank, so I wouldn't recommend it too much, but I thought I'd mention it. Now, Empowered Ward is probably one of the only good things about the Daedric Summoning line, and it's going to be providing an okay shield. It's not too high. The main benefit is that it lasts 10 seconds, which makes it one of the longest self-shields. In addition to that, it's also going to be providing minor intellect to you and your allies, which is a nice way of getting some magic recovery. Though once again, similarly to the minor crit that we talked about in Dark Magic, this is not going to be unique to tanks. Sorcerer tanks and other classes can provide this to the group. Nevertheless, worth considering. Now, Bound Armor, on the face of it, is a way of getting some extra resistances and also increasing our max Magicka pool. Now, because max stats are not so important on a tank in terms of stamina and Magicka, not too powerful, and even though the extra resistances are nice, once again, having to slot this on both bars makes it a little bit problematic. However, if you were looking for a max health tank because of the passive here, you might want to consider that Clan Fear strategy that I talked about before. However, reiterating, I don't recommend pet builds for your tank, though I don't want to ruin your fun. So, going on, that does also mean that a lot of these passives here are about your pets. So Daedric Protection is about pets, also Rebate and Expert Summoner. Now, Power Stone is the only passive not related to pets, and is actually one of the best passives, if not the best passive, that Sorc tanks have, reducing the cost of your ultimate ability by 15%. Now, the reason this is so powerful is it allows you to more liberally apply your ultimate abilities, such as Aggressive Warhorn in this case, which I already talked about how good that is, or maybe Absorption Field from Dark Magic line, because you might not, be too worried about using it in a trash fight as you have your Aggressive Warhorn back up for the boss fight. So it can really help you in a lot of situations. Moving now on to Stormcalling. Now, Stormcalling is similar to Daedric Summoning, in that Daedric Summoning was all about pets. Stormcalling, for the most part, is a lot about damage, at least with the passives and on many of the abilities. However, there are a few abilities here worth keeping in mind, and first is Boundless Storm. Now, this is just your standard way of getting a resistance, major resistances. All classes have some manner of getting this. Now, in terms of the unique aspects of this, it's going to be doing some AoE damage to the enemies around you. So when you pop this, running into a trash pack can get a little bit of initial aggro on you. Not reliable, but it can help out occasionally. Also, 23 seconds makes this quite a long major resistance buff, so it means that the cost 4k Magicka goes a little bit further, and it helps alleviate the fact that 4k Magicka is a bit more expensive than the equivalent ability on the DK, for example. Moving now on to... Oh, sorry, I should mention. There's also a major expedition component to this, which can be helpful if you want to dodge some particular abilities a boss does, but don't go crazy running around. In general, you want to just side strafe. When I say side strafe, you can look at my tanking tips videos where I talk about that in more detail. But yeah, major expedition can certainly be useful for a tank. Now, Streak, this is not really a serious ability in most cases. A lot of the time, you're not going to be using this, but it can be situationally quite good. And I don't think situationally is not a word, so let's just pretend that I meant situational. It's a situational ability. Now, the particular example I'm thinking of right now is not Crypt of Hearts, Cradle of Shadows. So in Cradle of Shadows, you can use this to gap close in particular fights where you want to gap close and interrupt a boss attack when they teleport. That's where it can be quite nice. Now it's also an alternate, for example, your standard shield charge, which a lot of tanks slot. Shield charge here, it's a stamina base, so if you want to only use Magicka, it's an option for you. Now, moving on to the passives, a lot of these passives are about damage, but Capacitor is one of the ones that's actually quite useful for tanking. Increasing your magic recovery is always nice, once again, in keeping with the nerfs. Anything we can get to get more sustain back is welcome, so a nice passive. The remainder of the passives in this line are damage orientated, though Expert Mage can be a minor min-max passive in that a little bit of extra spell and weapon damage can increase our healing, meaning we provide a bit more group support. However, not a big deal, though I guess it's always important to keep these minor things in mind as it all adds up. Before we finish the video by briefly summarising the pros and cons of Sorcerer tanking, there are two other abilities which came to mind while recording this, which I want to return to and just talk about. They are quite niche, but they could offer you an interesting playstyle, which I haven't necessarily tried, but on paper might work. The first ability is Ruin Prison. Now I talked about the sort of equivalent ability that DKs have, where you can CC an enemy for a long duration. It used to be used in DSA. Didn't want to mention this primarily because honestly a lot of the content now is just about killing things quickly and stacking them together, making this ability quite lackluster. However, if you are in a group which doesn't have the capabilities of dealing with all adds at once, you can use this to CC one outside and then get to it later. Obviously a slower technique, but one that was once used back in 2014, and I might as well mention it just in case it one day becomes useful. Moving on to Daedric Mines, this one has a bit more applicability, especially with Swarm Mothers, which pulls enemies in. So if you're to use this on your bar, perhaps as a back bar option, you can pop this around you, and then when adds spawn, if you taunt them, they'll get dragged to you, and then if they hit the mines, get immobilized there initially, allowing you to get some more proper taunt, such as Pierce Armor and Shred the Resistances. Certainly an option for you, but to me, Restraining Prison is something that fulfills a similar function and is a little bit more reliable. Doesn't rely on you having to try and line up the drag with hitting into a mine. So with that said, guys, just briefly summing up the Sorcerer tank. The downside of Sorcerers is that honestly their passives are for the most part quite underwhelming, with the exception of the 15% ult reduction, which allows you to get more ultimates out and is one of the strengths. Now ability wise, they do have comparable abilities to DK, such as Restraining Prison, meaning they can actually CC enemies in place, which is something Nightblades and Templars lack, so that is certainly a benefit. Another important thing to keep in mind is that the Sorc tanks can be quite mobile, with Boundless Storm giving you major expedition, and a Streak allowing you to, in certain niche situations, get around the battlefield quite quickly. Now, in terms of resource management, on paper you have quite good resource management with Dark Deal, however the caveat is you need to pay attention to what's around you, what's happening, and time your Dark Deals appropriately, meaning that you don't get CC'd or killed because you channeled an ability during a heavy attack. So overall, I quite like Sorcerer tank. I think it's comparable to Nightblade, and perhaps with Morrowind nerfs, maybe even a little bit better than Nightblade now. And what I would say is, if you're thinking about playing a Sorcerer tank, I'd really recommend Argonian, just to help you with that resource sustain a little bit more. A final downside is that all of the useful abilities that Sorcs have for tanking do not scale with max HP, and that is one of the few ways now that new tank builds such as your Ward and your DK have found their way of excelling in the tanking role, max stacking your HP with Plague Doctors, for example. So you need to be a little bit concerned with that if you are thinking about trial content, as I'm unsure how this tank will hold up, but for 4-man you should have no issue. So with that said, guys, I hope you enjoyed the video. Let me know what you thought of it. Any comments, criticism, etc. is greatly appreciated. And until the next video, which will hopefully be quite soon, since I'm on holiday, take care and bye for now.